Hi, I'm Peggy Farron. Welcome to the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel, nature, and fine art photography. We're going to be talking about intimate landscapes today with Charlotte Gibb. Hey, if you are struggling with photography, you need to get that foundation first. Once you have the foundation in photography, everything else comes more easily. So we have a class, of course, called the 4 Weeks to Proficiency in Photography, and it's an interactive class. So you have homework, you have deadlines, you have a teacher, that's me, and you have accountability. It's not like a traditional online class where you just watch a video and nobody ever talks to you again. This way, you're going to have the accountability. You're going to have a teacher to ask if you're stuck and you don't understand something. Say, hey, I don't get it. And I'm going to be there to help you. Check understandphotography.com to see when the next one starts. And while you're there, watch our free webinar. It's about a half an hour webinar, and it is going to teach you what you need to learn. Now, if you don't want to take our class, that's fine. But watch that free replay of the webinar, because that will give you a plan of action on what you need to have that solid photography education. You need to be able to shoot in the manual mode, for one. That doesn't mean you have to shoot in the manual mode all the time, but you need to be able to. So that's one of the few things. It's not that much stuff. You can do it. Understandphotography.com. Also, please join one of our Facebook groups. We have two. One is called the Understand Photography Group, and it is just a general photography group. We share pictures. You can ask for critiques if you like. You don't have to. You can ask any kind of questions you want. What kind of, how do I test the sharpness of my lens was one of the questions recently. What kind of lens do I buy if I'm a landscape photographer or whatever? Any kind of question that you want. We have a nice team of experts, and they're all volunteers, just a bunch of people who like to help each other. It's a very kind and friendly group. Understand Photography Group. Our other group is called Selling Your Photography as Art, and that is a support group for artists. It's not a place where you're going to sell your art. You're going to learn how to sell your art, or you're going to ask questions about how to sell your art, or you're going to get inspired by some of the other photo artists there in that group. You're going to find ideas that you probably didn't think about. So either one of our groups you can get to from our Facebook group. So facebook.com/understandphotography. And then you'll see a little link there somewhere where it says groups. Selling Your Photography as Art is one of them, and Understand Photography Group is the other one. So Charlotte Gibb has been a graphic designer, an art director, a photojournalist for many years, but she really got into landscape photography about 10 years ago, and she's become very well known for her intimate landscape. So she's going to tell us what that means and how we can get involved in intimate landscapes. So welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Peggy.
Hey, tell our audience a little bit about you.
Well, I spent most of my adult life as a graphic artist, working for an ad agency and then with my own design firm for many, many years. And before that, I had studied photojournalism. So I have kind of a background in photography that's quite varied. So when I decided to go into nature and landscape photography about 10 years ago, I kind of brought all of that information with me and have been applying it to my work that I'm doing now.
Awesome. So you're known for your intimate landscapes. Now, what do you mean by that? What is an intimate landscape?
That's a good question. Intimate landscapes, the name is actually is pretty much attributed to a photographer named Elliott Porter, who was a photographer about the same time Ansel Adams was doing his work in black and white. Elliott Porter was doing these beautiful color portraits of nature, where they were just extracted smaller scenes of nature. Instead of taking in the grand landscape, they were little small pieces of the landscape. So it could be a single tree instead of the whole valley view. Things like a collection of small patterns in leaves or water. Typically the sky is illuminated. you wouldn't necessarily include the sky in an intimate landscape. There's no rules against it, but the idea about an intimate landscape is there's a clue in the name, intimate, because intimate means, you know, your personal connection with something smaller in the grand landscape.
Okay. So walk us through how you find an interesting scene.
Well, the first thing I do is I just kind of slow down and I lower my expectations quite a lot. When you go to a big grand landscape, you might have in mind like, oh, I'm going to go capture this fantastic sunrise or sunset or this fantastic dramatic light. With an intimate landscape, you basically you want to slow down enough to the point where you can notice things in the landscape that catch your attention. So you really need to pay attention to what you're feeling inside and what's capturing your attention, and you want to bring a sense of curiosity and playfulness to it. So you might walk up to a very large, like I photograph up in Yosemite quite a bit because I live in California and it's you know fairly close to for me to get there. Yeah, I know I suffer, right? But it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place to go. And there's a couple of places where you can get these huge grand vistas that are just gorgeous. And what I do is I will start picking out smaller pieces of that grand landscape. And one of the ways you can do this if you're not really used to walking up to a big landscape and it can feel overwhelming, and you get out your wide angle lens, but what you can do is start zeroing in, like expand the live view in the back of your screen monitor and start picking out smaller pieces of the landscape that way. And then go back to your camera bag and grab your telephoto lens and use that to zero in, you know, on something that maybe caught your attention. That's one
Okay.
way. There's lots of ways to approach it, but that's one way.
Yeah, that's good though. Just so you just like kind of zoom in the live view as you're
hmm
looking around into different parts of the scene to see whatever looks right. And then,
That's one way. Or if you're comfortable, you can just put the telephoto lens on right away and start zooming in that way into parts of the landscape. Now, that's not to say that you can't make an intimate landscape with a wide angle lens, because you can, but but those are going to be a little bit more close up. I'm talking about if you're approaching a very grand landscape, you know, how do you start zeroing in on a composition from that larger scene? How do you zero in and make an intimate landscape?
yeah, I mean, are you like if I'm doing a vast landscape, I'm looking for, you know, I'm looking at my composition and my light, of course, but I'm looking for like an anchor subject or you know, something to put in the foreground. Is it a similar thought process or?
Uh, it's, you know, I'm not really looking for necessarily a dramatic, you know, foreground, you know, with near far views. I'm looking for a composition. I'm looking at taking that 3D scene in front of me and turning it into a 2D image. And so, you know, you've got to use lots of different kinds of compositional tricks to do that. And yeah, you might want to use some near far, but not the dramatic kind of near far landscapes you see with wide angle. They're more quiet. These types of compositions are they're more simple. You're taking just a few relational objects and arranging them in the frame in a really elegant way, and you know you're using just a few things to tell a bigger story. So we're not going necessarily for big drama. We're going for quiet contemplation, something that is thoughtful, something that you know makes the viewer stop and really you know try to understand what the visual story is that the photographer is trying to tell.
Okay, so give me some examples of some of the scenes that you have photographed.
Well, let's see here.
You have to
Like for
describe it
example,
because this is a
I
podcast.
know. Well, I know it's I have so many. I've been doing this for a while, but well, let's just take Yosemite for example. I mean, Yosemite has lots of beautiful waterfalls. It's known for its incredibly dramatic cliffs with water just you know, careening off the sides of these cliffs in gorgeous patterns. And so instead of trying to photograph the whole waterfall with the top and the bottom and everything around it, you know, I might just zero in on part of the waterfall, like that is creating an interesting pattern. or some shapes that I find interesting. And I might try slow shutter speeds. I might try some fast shutter speeds and see how how it looks if I'm freezing the action versus letting the water blur a little bit. But typically these are very very simple compositions. They're not necessarily have a lot of elements inside them. They might just have 2 or 3, and that's it. So
Okay.
they can be considered abstractions also of the landscape.
A little bit. Yeah. Okay. Like you can still tell what it is, but is
Yeah,
that
you
what
have to think a little bit. Yeah,
okay.
you have to think. Like one of my favorite things to do is play along the river. And if you put a polarizing filter on the end of your camera and you polarize it a little bit but not all the way, you can really play off the reflection and the bottom of the river because the bottom of the Merced River that runs through Yosemite Valley has lots of interesting rocks at the bottom of it. And if you polarize it all the way, you can see all those rocks, but then you eliminate the really interesting reflections on top of the water. So I will oftentimes just polarize halfway and I can get both. A little bit of the reflection, a little bit of the river bottom, and then your mind starts playing tricks on you. And that's what's really great about an intimate landscape. It's just to get, your objective is to get the viewer to stop and study it. Like, what are they looking at? You want to stop and appreciate the beauty. And in order to do that as a photographer, you really have to have a deep passion for your subject and a deep understanding of your subject and an innate curiosity. So that means you really do have to just wander and slow down and not hurry because you'll walk right past these things if you're going too fast. If you're trying to get from point A to B, you'll walk right past these things. So I suggest slow down and enjoy, and that's how you do this kind of work.
So give us some examples of without water in them.
Okay, well, um, let's see here. I was going to say Half Dome, which is a very famous landmark in Yosemite, is a big, beautiful piece of granite rock. It's, been photographed to death. It's so iconic and it's so beautiful, and I've photographed it to death. Everybody who goes there photographs it to death. Um, but what I try to do is I try to abstract it when I go to photograph it. So now instead of being this iconic shape of Half Dome, it's a series of shapes, of repeating shapes. So I have several pictures like this of Half Dome where maybe I'm just showing a part of it, like trees lining up on this impossibly thin shelf where trees, you can't imagine how these giant trees are growing out of this solid granite. And I just zero in on that. Or I zero in on the juxtaposition of these different shapes against each other, the repeating patterns. So things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I have I never thought about what to call it, but we have been doing tours to Cuba, and it's only 90 miles away from here. It's not even an hour plane ride, and we went to this area called Vinales, which has some really unique looking mountains, and of course there are palm trees. And we got this hotel where every room just overlooks this beautiful valley with the mountains in the background. And it was really foggy and everybody had their long lens, but because we were all in our individual rooms, I had all my gear right there. So I thought, I'm going to put my long lens on and see what happens. And one of my favorite photographs from that trip was I zoomed in on the fog with the palm trees just kind of barely showing through the fog. So you kind of, just like you said, you have to kind of study it. And it doesn't look like a photograph at all. I didn't Photoshop it hardly, I didn't really make any changes in Photoshop, but it looks like a painting because it's just so unreal looking. It's really cool. I didn't know I was an intimate landscaper.
That's really cute. I didn't know there was a name for it until I had been doing this for quite some time. And somebody said, well, do you know who Elliott Porter is? And I didn't. So I went and looked up Elliott Porter. I went, oh my gosh, that's the kind of stuff that I've been doing is this kind of work that fascinates me, because there's a lot of subgenres in the nature and landscape. I mean, there's everything from macro to wildlife. I mean, and birds. I mean, all of that is kind of gets mixed up, into this big, broad category. But I like to move from category to I also do some wildlife, but wildlife wildlife moves, and I have a hard time photographing things that are moving really fast. I tend to like landscapes. It's a little bit less stressful. But yeah, you can still be very, very playful with these types of landscapes. And I go, like I said, I go up to Yosemite quite a bit. And as you know, Yosemite has been photographed by the masters for eons. And like, who am I to go up there and try to do anything different than what's already been done, a gazillion times? Who am I to try to, what am I gonna do? So it's always a big challenge to go there. And what you do is when you start zeroing in, Yosemite Valley becomes infinite. I mean, because there's not going to be someone else who's going to see it exactly the way you saw it. It becomes this infinite playground. And I'll go back and photograph like the same dang tree, every season. Like I have a couple photographs of this one dogwood, and you would never know it's the same dogwood. One is in black and white, and the wind is blowing, and so the branches are moving, and it's in slow. I used a long shutter speed, so the blossoms, the white blossoms are blurred and everything. And then I went back to that exact same tree in the fall when it was all yellow and gorgeous, and I photographed that tree again, kind of in the Pet Ventosa style, where you move your camera, into about 30 different positions, and then you layer those together in Photoshop. Completely different. I was completely bored out of my mind because I had photographed this tree so many times. It's like, well, what am I going to do differently about this tree? It looks different. It is different. So going back to the same places over and over again, it 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 creates a sense of playfulness, because you have to. Because if you don't get playful, you're going to be bored out of your mind, and every time you go back to the place. So you have to play. And when you start playing, that's when creativity starts happening.
That's
Does
cool.
that make sense?
Yeah, it's funny because you call it play and I call it when I get bored.
Did I lose you? Yeah.
When I get really bored, I start trying to think of something really different. And in fact, that's an exercise that I do all the time. And I suggest to my students all the time to do it. We're just sit there and do not move for an hour and just come up with whatever you can come up with. And it's really hard to do. For me, I'm not patient. So I love that. I think it's a great idea. And then of course you're out in nature, so it's good for your brain and your soul too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good for your soul, good for your brain, and good for your blood pressure too. So, it's the slowing down is really, really important part of this, is to slow down. And also the other thing I want to add is that I kind of touched on this, but it's a way to create really original, unique work, because no one's going to, if you were standing next to somebody, let's say at Tunnel View in Yosemite, which is this big, beautiful, broad landscape of Yosemite Valley, and everybody had a wide angle lens, chances are everyone's going to come up with a similar composition, But the minute you start zeroing in on smaller pieces of the landscape, there's more of a chance to reveal your unique way of seeing things. Someone else isn't going to see it in the exact same way that you see it. It's a way for you to create and develop your own way of working and sense of original work, which I really highly encourage to do.
Awesome. Now, how does light come into play when you're doing these type of intimate scenes?
So light's important, obviously, because as photographers, that's ultimately what we're photographing is light. If there's no light, there's no photograph. So, but what we're not worried about is dramatic skies. We're looking for beautiful light, and beautiful light can be anything from like God beams coming in through fog can create beautiful light, or misty waterfalls with light shining through, or side light, you know, lighting up these beautiful trees, or backlight. So light's very, very important, but it's also it can also be just as interesting to photograph in open shade. And open shade is a lot of photographers would find open shade to be really boring because it's
Flat.
just very flat. But it's a way to really pull out the details of a landscape without dappled light, without the harshness. So I never, I'm never afraid of open shade. I like it a lot. It lets you focus in on smaller details.
Okay, and you know what? I teach a lighting class, and we
Mm.
talk about open shade a lot, but for those of our audience who is not sure what open shade is, can you describe it or explain it?
Sure. Well, open shade is when it could be a cloudy day, for example, or it could be that um, it could be a sunny day, but you're in an area where the sun is blocked. So you don't have any kind of dappled light filtering through trees or anything. You are actually in shade. You will not see your shadow because you're in shade. So that's open shade, and it doesn't mean that you aren't going to get reflected light. One thing that we love is reflected light, and the way you get reflected light is if you're in an area where there's a canyon, for example, and there's light bouncing off the tops of the walls, and you're down in shadow. You can get beautiful bounce light as if you were in a studio, which you know all about, Peggy, right?
Yeah, well, I gotta, I started as a portrait photographer, as I told you, so
Yeah.
I learned a lot about controlling light, and it's funny because I got into nature photography afterwards, and you know what? It's light is light. You just have different ways to deal with it. So, open shade, you definitely have some
That's
light
right.
though. It's not deep shade where it's dark. You're not in a dark forest or something like that where you have very little light. Open shade means there is a lot of either reflected light or light filtering in from because you're close to where the light source is. So, all right. So soft light is pretty, is what you're saying. And you can get the really more close-ups. Now, you already told us about how you use your polarizer to kind of control light a little bit, right? So you use your polarizer at
Hmm.
half, you said, to get some of the reflections of the water in instead of getting rid of them completely. You're using God beams, you said. That can actually be a design element, right? You could have
Hmm.
what is the official name for a God beam? I don't even know.
I don't know. We've been calling them that for so long. Sunbeams maybe, but sunbeams can be boring. God beams are really dramatic. They're coming through mist and fog and creating beautiful shafts of light, and you do feel like somehow you're in the presence of the divine when you see it like that.
Yeah.
But what I could also add about the usefulness of a polarizing filter, and how there's many ways to use a polarizing filter. I don't use it for every photo. I use it for very specific types of photographs. But for example, if you're photographing trees or fall color, or anything that's got a little shine on it, if you put a polarizing filter on your lens and then you polarize it, it will cut down on the glare on the leaves of the trees, and you'll get much deeper, richer colors on your photographs of nature. It's also really handy if you're photographing creeks and water, to experiment with polarizing to reduce the glare on the rocks. So the rocks may have this spectral highlight shining off of them where they're wet. Well, if you polarize it, that goes away and those rocks turn black. So that's a really good thing to experiment with when you're out in the field. I always keep do you want to talk about gear real quick? Because I
Yeah,
can go into
let's.
that a little bit. There's not a lot to talk about. Okay. So, so besides the polarizing filter, I keep 3 neutral density filters. I don't have one for every stop. I don't need to. I don't feel that I need to. I have a polarizing filter, like I said, and then a 3-stop neutral density filter, a 6-stop neutral density filter, and a 10-stop. And I have that set for all my lenses in each side. So I may carry around 3 sets of polarizing filters. I know that's a lot, but I really discourage the use of the what they call them, the variable neutral density filters, where you can dial it in, because you get them every now and then. You can get a moire pattern, and it's so sad, to see when a student has used one of these and they get back and there's just no fixing it in the, in the dark room. It's
I've
just
done it.
ruined. Oh, that happened to you?
Oh yeah, I bought one. I thought, well, this one's only $80, and if you buy it, it's got all the stops. And I kept getting like an X. I couldn't see it though until I got home, and there was like a black
Right.
X in all my pictures. And actually, Lewis Kemper explained to me why that was happening, but I didn't understand. I thought I understood when he told me,
Well,
but
it's essentially it's essentially it's a moire pattern. So if you ever have seen, like, if you take two, say, just window screens, like screens, and if you start crossing them that way, you'll see a pattern emerge. It's called a moire pattern, and that's what's happening with these variable neutral density filters, because that's what they do. They're trying to use two sets of screens to create darker or lighter, but it's not fun. I'm so sorry that happened to you, Peggy, because I've seen that happen before, and I know it's more expensive to buy a filter for each one that you need, but you do it once. I mean, I've had these filters for years, and that's it. You do it once and you're done, and you don't have to get them all at once, and you can stack them up on each other, or you can even just get one set and then buy, the adapter rings to adapt it up or down for your lens. I don't do that. I get the filter for the lens, but that's another way of handling it if you wanted to keep costs down.
And by the way, there is a blog article on step rings on the understandphotography.com website. If anybody wanted to there's a little magnifying glass right on the website. Just do a search under step rings and you'll find an article that goes through them. Anyway.
Oh, excellent. So, the other thing I can share some of my lessons learned the hard way about is this very sad story about tripod acquisition and getting the right tripod. There's certain pieces of gear that that you might be tempted to skimp on, and I would say the one piece of gear you really actually don't want to is the tripod, because a sturdy tripod for this kind of work is really very essential. You want to make sure your pictures are really sharp, and they're not going to be sharp if you aren't able to take the photograph when the camera's very still and you're able to use an f-stop like f16 or so to make sure everything is tack sharp front to back. So you really need a good tripod. The way to pick out a tripod is to get one that when it's fully extended and the camera's on it, it's at your eye level. If you have to extend, like, for example, a neck of the tripod, like the center pole, to get it that height, it's probably too small of a tripod for you. I'll share my very, very sad tripod story with you. When I was early on, when I was first doing this work, and I got my very first brand new L Canon lens, and it was a 70-200, and I'd just gotten it. It was like 3 months old, and I'm up in Yosemite, and I have a tripod that I had purchased. I bought it used, and it was way too small for me, but I wanted something kind of lightweight. I didn't really want to carry around a lot of weight. And I had the tripod extended, and the neck was extended to its full length. And I turned around to grab something out of my camera bag, and I heard this crash, and my entire rig went down the bank of the river. And I did not cry. I picked it up. I checked it out. The whole front end of my lens was smashed. My camera was smashed. And so I took it into my local camera store. It took me 2 weeks to get up the guts to go in there and admit that I dropped my camera. And they were very, very nice. They were very nice. They said, Charlotte, we've all dropped our cameras. If you do this, you're going to drop your camera at some point. And so after that, one of the camera store guys said, you probably had your tripod set up improperly. And right then and there, he gave me a lesson on proper tripod setup. And then I realized I had a tripod that was way too small for me. I got another tripod that was a little bit bigger. It was too small for me. I didn't knock over my camera again, but that tripod was also too small. And so now I have this tripod that's, this essentially, I think it's 7.5 feet tall. It'll extend, but you want that kind of height because if you're on, like, say, a hillside or an embankment, you want that front leg to be extended out all the way in front of you to stabilize it. And then you're standing between the two, the two T's in the back. So the front leg is down the bank, and you want the camera at eye level, no center post, unless you really want a center post, but that's what really destabilizes the whole system. So that, and then the last piece of gear on that system is getting a really good ball head, for the top, because, if you don't have a decent ball head, it can be very, very frustrating if, for example, if it's not rated for as heavy, yeah, you got it, as heavy of a lens. So you want to get a really good sturdy one. And it took me about 3 tries to finally get one that I love. And it works, it's a geared system, and it's a Arca Swiss geared, I think it's called a M1 ball head. And you get the camera loosely in place, and then you can turn little gears to dial in on your composition. Works great. And so you buy it once and then you're done. You don't have to think about gear, because the last thing I want to do when I'm out in the field is think about gear. I mean, I want to know my gear really, really well. I want it to work really well for me, and I don't want to think about it because I'm creating. I'm not thinking about my camera. It's just doing what it's supposed to do, right?
How much money do you think you wasted on those tripods that didn't work for you?
Oh, many hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
Many hundreds, maybe close to 2,000 when you add them all together.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Because they were Gitzo tripods. They were Gitzo, really good quality tripods, but they weren't the right size. I still have them. I do. I still have them because, sometimes you might have a smaller system and you're backpacking or whatever, and you need a little tripod that isn't heavy. So they do have their purpose, but my mainstay is my really large Gitzo. That one is my mainstay.
So how much did you end up spending in the one that you like, with the ball head and the legs?
That system is about $3,500 for between the two pieces. Yeah, it's a lot.
I think people really don't understand that a good tripod is really expensive. And everybody wants to buy the $100, the $200. And what most people do is they buy the $100 or $200 tripod to start, and then they buy the $600, and then they buy the $1,000. So they waste all that money before they finally admit, they accept the fact that they need to get this good tripod that costs so much money.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. And I think legitimately, I mean, maybe people don't know that they're going to be doing this for very long, and they don't want to waste a lot of money. I buy a lot of my gear used. Whenever I can buy it used, I buy it used. And the beauty of that is you can sell it if it doesn't work out. There's a good used market out there for camera gear, and I tap into that as much as I can, especially with lenses. I had this I bought this 400 millimeter L lens, this Canon lens that I loved. It was a fixed focal length though, and so it didn't have a lot of flexibility, but I used it. I bought it used from my camera store. I used it for about 3 years. Then I decided I would be better served by like a 100 to 400 zoom. And so I sold it back to them, and I sold it back to the camera store for more than what I paid for it.
Wow.
So I'm a big believer in used gear, on some things. Maybe not camera bodies, but even my camera body, I bought it. It was just lightly used, and so I did that. You can save a lot of money doing it that way. I
agree. For me, it's flashes. I have so many lights. I'm really into lighting. It's fun for me, and I almost always buy everything used, because lights are one of those things that people buy and then they might think it's too complicated, or they need to have the latest speed light that comes out. And I do have the latest. I'm a Canon shooter, so I do have the latest 600 EX, but I also have a couple of 580 EX2s that I bought used. I still have my 550s, and I bought an extra one of those used as well, because you can get those for next to nothing, and they're pretty powerful flashes. And back then they were simpler, so they didn't break as often, and they weren't so complicated. They weren't crazy computers like they are now, with too many things that can go wrong. And lights are lights. So yeah, and my lens, my story about my same lens, the 70 to 200 2.8, that was one of the first lenses I bought when I started my company. And as I got older, it got heavier. And so I found myself never using it. I bought a 70 to 300 f4, and I was using that because it weighs a lot less. So finally I thought, I gotta sell this thing. I'm not using it. It's stupid, right? So, a few times a year, the camera repair store, Southern Photo Technical Service, comes over here to Naples from Miami, and they'll clean sensors. And then one time, Edward from Use Photo Pro came as well. And so I thought, this is my opportunity. I brought a bunch of gear, but that lens, I paid about $2,000 for it in 2001. And in 2017, I sold it for $1,200, which
That's fantastic.
I mean, it obviously went down a little, but that's a lot of years for that fabulous lens to only have spent $800 on it, basically, since I got $1,200 back. So I was pretty impressed with the resale value on lenses, not cameras.
Right.
Cameras are like cars, man. The minute you drive them off the showroom floor, they've gone down.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
All right.
Well,
So
that's funny. That it was my 70 to 200 f2.8 that went down the bank, and Canon fixed it for me. They sent it back to me, but I swear that lens has like a quality to it like no other lens that I own. It has a softness to it. I mean, it's still sharp. It's very, very sharp, but it's got this kind of mystical quality to it that I love. And it's still it weighs a ton. I don't need an f2.8. I could probably do with an f4 just fine. But I love that lens. It's still my very favorite, and I've had it for years now.
yeah, well, it's too heavy for me. All right, so let's get back to the intimate landscapes. So now you were a graphic designer. How does that, come into play in these intimate scenes?
Yeah, good question, Peggy. So with intimate scenes, there's a lot less, how do I put this? The grand landscape scenes, there's so many ways you can compose things, like you were mentioning, like the near far composition, or framing, or just doing the big broad landscape. With intimate compositions, they're a lot less forgiving about compositional rules. So you have to know what you're doing in terms of composition to create interest, because they depend on that interest. They can't depend on anything very flashy. They have to work from a compositional standpoint. So I know a lot about composition because I did it my entire adult life. I studied it in school. I put it in practice as an art director. The composition works in painting, in photographs, in whatever art form you're doing. Composition comes into play. So having a really solid foundation and understanding the elements of composition is super important. So what I try to do when I approach a landscape and I see it, I try to abstract it in my mind. Instead of saying, oh, what a beautiful tree that is, I go, that tree has a triangular shape. And over there, that rock is a circle. And oh, that river is a rectangle, or it's a shape. These are shapes. Oh, that's a line. Oh, that's a curvy line. If I position my body this way, now it's a diagonal line. And each one of these elements carries a different emotional impact. So for example, a landscape with a really strong horizontal lines, like the picture that's behind you, it has a horizontal line, but then it also has like a vertical line coming into it. So it creates a sense of peacefulness because you've got these strong horizontal lines, but you also have this diagonal coming into it, going into the dark orange, which is a very exciting color, and diagonals create excitement. So it creates some dynamic tension. So the same thing goes for intimate landscapes. You want to position your body
Can
and
I interrupt you really fast? I just want to, for our podcast listeners, I have a picture of the pier behind me. So the horizon of the water is straight, but the pier is going in towards the sun on a, kind of a converging diagonal line. That's what she's talking about. Because remember, most people can't see this.
This is so interesting to have to describe photographs.
I know, it's awesome.
I love it. It's a beautiful photograph. So if there's a chance for you to go see it, go take a look at it. It's really pretty. But so these compositional rules are really important in intimate landscapes. So things like how you combine the elements. Like for example, if you've got, like, say for example, you're photographing a waterfall, if you want to say, I want to show how statuesque this waterfall is, you might turn your camera on a vertical or a portrait portrait rather than landscape position, because that's going to give it more stature. It's going to show it as tall, because vertical lines give a feeling of power. So if you did it as a horizontal, it might not have that kind of impact, right? So, understanding these compositional rules helps when you're out in nature and you're composing. You make those decisions based on what you're trying to convey about the scene. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
no, I'm writing a whole book about this stuff. It's not stuff that I didn't make this stuff up myself. These are compositional rules that have been used for eons. The painters understood them. The great painters did. Designers understand them. We understand how to use color to evoke emotion. For example, yellow is a really happy, optimistic color, and you'll see it in just everyday things in your life. Like if you think about things that use yellow in design, like McDonald's or the happy face or the Amazon smile, those are all yellow. They want you to feel good and happy about these symbols. Whereas you might look at blue. Blue is a very calming color. Dark blue creates a sense of stability and trust. So if you look at companies that use blue, you're going to see a lot of things like United Airlines, AT&T, Chase Bank, companies that want you to, to understand that they're very solid, that they're very trustworthy. So designers know about this, and we were taught this, and so we use these kinds of concepts. I use these kinds of concepts in my photography as well, and I combine them with other kinds of concepts about shapes and the symbology of shapes and the symbology of lines, so that the picture becomes more than a picture of, say a river. And now it's a picture of abstraction of shapes that has a deeper meaning than just the sum of its parts.
Okay, what's the name of your book?
You know what? I think it's going to be called Get Intimate, Making a Personal Statement with Intimate Landscapes.
Ooh.
And the point of this book is about, the subtext of this book, and we love subtext, right, in books. Maybe I shouldn't tell you, but the subtext is, get out there and create original work, and here's a way you can do it. That your work is going to look different, and you're going to be able to create your own unique style by working in this manner. Work like this. Do it a little bit differently, and see what happens.
Okay, all right. And that book has not been released yet.
No, it is not finished yet. It's right at the moment. It's with my editor, and she's reviewing it, and it's coming back to me probably tomorrow. And then I pedal to the metal, and I get the thing finished, laid out. And the first release will be an ebook, and we'll see how that goes. And then if it goes well, I might do a second edition as a paper book. But we're just going to see how that goes with the first edition. And I'd love to get feedback from people and what they think, and maybe what they would like to see more of or don't understand, and then hopefully on the second edition I'll have a lot more to offer.
Well, you got to make sure you let me know and I'll promote it to everybody. And I'll actually put it in the YouTube comments too when the book does come
Oh,
out.
thank you, Peggy.
Hey,
Thank you.
I love
That's
to read.
nice.
And I'm like a fanatic about composition. I started teaching, when I first started teaching, I was teaching the basic photography principles and a lot of portrait stuff and a lot of posing. Posing is basically composition. You're composing the people
Mhm.
and you want them to look good. It's not about, being stiff and icky. It's about, turning sideways so you don't look fat, getting rid of a double chin, whatever. But when I got more into landscape photography, I like really got into it because it was so clear to me, and I guess it's because I do have more formal training in photography than a lot of the newer photographers. But I would see their pictures and there would be like, no separation. There'd be like a dark something behind somebody with dark hair, so it just was jarring to your eye. Or somebody would be, the bird would be looking off to the side of the page, and there was no room in front of where the bird was looking, and just there were just so many things, and I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, so Joe Fitzpatrick and I put the composition class together. That sounded funny. We put it together. I don't know how else to say that. We put it, we produced it together. We wrote it together. And we
Mhm.
talk about so many things that you just brought up, about the old masters and how they've proven this stuff scientifically what our eyes like. It's not something,
Mhm.
and
Exactly.
yes, of course you can just wing it if you want to, but it's always better to be trained, and then you can break the rules if you want to, but you'll know why you're breaking them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot of rules, mm, like lately I've been fond of centering my subject, which they always say, don't center your subject. It's boring, but I have a different point of view about that. I think that if your point of centering your subject is to make it more meditative and more quiet, then it's absolutely appropriate to center it. If your eye won't move around the composition as much, but that's not the point. The point is you're trying to create, if you want a meditative type of quiet composition, by all means, go ahead and center it. So things like that, that you know people who are doing this kind of work, really do understand composition, because the intimate landscape requires a very solid foundation of composition.
All right, so give us like just a general, like, 5 good tips for creating an intimate landscape.
Okay, 5 good tips. Well, let's see. Leave out the sky. Like, don't include the sky. The reason you don't want to include the sky is because the sky is often the brightest thing in the frame, and it's going to pull your eye to it. So unless the sky is the thing you want them to, your viewer to look at, don't include it, because the eye will go straight to it. It's always the brightest part of the frame. So that's number one. Um, Number two, zoom with your feet or zoom with a lens. Try to get up and close and personal. Try to do, I know if you're addicted to the wide angle lens, well, then zoom with your feet. But if you have a zoom lens, put that on and try just poking around the landscape with it. Work in live view if you can. I prefer that, but you don't have to. I prefer to work in live view. It lets you zoom in and look around the back of the camera. So that would be another one. That's two. Let's see, three. Um, Three, I would say slow down, be curious, be interested in your subject, have study your subject, have some passion for it, have some interest for it, because that's going to show up in your work. If you just show up to get the shot that you kind of had in your head, it might work, but what if the conditions aren't how you wanted them to be? What if that fog isn't there that you expected? So now you're dealing with nothing. So you have to take an inventory of what's going on around you. So slow down, take a visual inventory. What's happening right now in the landscape? Is there, instead of fog, maybe you have frost. So what can you do with the frost? Or, you know, so look at your feet, look down at your feet, look around, slow down, play.
Can I interrupt you? Because today in our
Yeah.
Understand Photography Facebook group, somebody put a picture of tulips with snow on top of them, and it was so cool. It just reminded me,
Aww.
because it was unique. It was different. All right, I interrupted your flow. So you were on 3.
That's okay. I'm not really in a flow. I'm trying to be helpful here and think of concrete things that might be helpful. One thing that I find is that I need to do this kind of work by myself. Because if you're with someone else, you might be going at their pace or be worried if you're slowing them down, or that maybe they're getting in your shot or you're getting in their shot. So I prefer to work alone when I'm doing this work. It's not to say that I don't do, I like to be around people actually. I'm a very social person, but I have to admit that my best work is when I'm alone. It really is. It's when I can really slow down. I'm making sure, you know, I'm making sure that I have everything I need for myself. I have water, I have snacks, so I'm not too hungry. You know, I have the right gear, so I'm warm enough. If I'm warm enough, I'm groovy. If my myself is taken care of, I can be out as long as I need to be out. So when the light gets interesting or something happens interesting, I'm ready. I'm not going, oh dang it, you know, I should have I should have had a better meal before I left or whatever. So just really taking care of yourself is super important in nature photography. I know that sounds silly to mention that, but I see so many people that are they kind of give up too early because they're not prepared to be out for very long. So you have to be prepared to be out for a while because this is slow work, very, very slow work. What else? um, oh, here's one. You want to eliminate distractions. So when you are zooming in on something, it can be really frustrating because nature doesn't always cooperate. It can be very, very messy business. So what you want to do is try to pick out just a few elements. Start with just a couple and arrange them in the frame nicely. And that'll allow you to also be cropping out any kind of distracting elements that might be bleeding in on the side. The most important thing about a frame, especially in an intimate landscape, is that you don't have any distracting elements around the edge of the frame. We call it border control. So or border patrol. We go around the borders and we, make sure there's nothing, distracting there. You either crop it out, or if it's small, just, use the spot adjustment, in Lightroom or Photoshop and just, erase it out. So those are the distractions in a photograph are going to take your eye where you don't want it to go. So that's a huge important part of doing a small scene like this, is that you've eliminated any kind of distracting element.
Okay, that's some good stuff.
Is that 5?
That was 5.
If I could go on, there's lots of things.
Now, you make your living in workshops and selling your fine art. Is that true?
No, I don't actually. I mentioned to you before, I was a graphic designer for many, many years, and that's where I made my living. Yeah, I decided when I went into this line of work. Well, my husband and I had a software company for many years. We just sold it 6 months ago. So with my time freed up now a lot more, I'm not helping out with a company anymore. I am starting to teach more. I'm starting to try to be helpful in my photography community, but I never required my photography to support me because I wanted to do it for the love of it. And it turns out I love teaching. I love writing. I love doing these things. I do them because I love to do them, but I'm not requiring my photography to support me. I just want to share what I know. And I've met so many interesting people through this. I do assist for Michael Fry's workshops. I love to assist because assisting is kind of like being a grandparent, I think. You get to go have the fun and interact with all the students, but you don't have any of the big responsibility. So I love doing that. I love doing this and having conversations about photography with you and with other photographers. But I'm probably not the person to come to if you're looking at how to make a living from your work. I've had some epic fails in trying to sell prints and trying to, get my work to actually make a living for me. So I'm probably not the best person for those kinds of questions. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate your honesty, because that's, I think especially selling your artwork as a photographer, as any kind of artist, is a tough business. That term starving artist is there for a reason. You can do it. It's just not, it's not easy. So
Right.
I think everybody appreciates your honesty. And right now with the way things are, are any of us going to stay in the workshop business? I think
Oh boy.
that
I know.
COVID-19 really threw us, those of us who are in the workshop and tour business, through a loop, man. So you never know. You never know. It's nice. It's nice to do photography for fun. Lisa Langell was our keynote speaker, I don't know, a couple of conferences ago for our statewide conference in Florida. And she started her talk and she said, why does everybody feel like they have to sell their art? I mean, people start taking pictures and people say, hey, what are you going to do with that? You going to sell it? It's like, why do I have to sell it? Can't I just do it for the sheer joy?
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, I would do this if nobody saw my work. I would still do it for sure. I love the whole process. I love it. You know, I love being out in the field. I love creating. I mean, if I've been a creator my entire adult life. Besides photography, I play music. I cook, I garden, I create. And I think that that's another thing I wanted to actually mention is that I call it cross training, because you bring all of that creative energy into your photography. And if those other things that bring you joy, do those things that bring you joy, and bring that joy into your photography. And don't do the photography if it's a chore, because if it's a chore, it's going to show up. If you're unhappy, it's going to show up. I remember back, oh my gosh, there's this one grove of aspen trees that I would go back to again and again and again, like year after year after year, like seeing old friends, and I'd photograph them repeatedly. And they always kind of looked a little different. And this one year, this one year I came, it was 2016. It was before the 2016 election, and things were just getting so nasty in that election. And I just was turning off the news because I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I felt very dark. And my photographs during that period were dark. They were all dark. They all had this kind of moody deepness to them. And then I kind of lightened up with spring when spring came around, and my photographs started showing a lighter mood. But my point is that we bring our moods to our photographs. We do. And so do those things that are interesting, that interest you, and be curious. And that kind of innate playfulness and curiosity and creativeness will show up in your work. It just will. So if you're a person who's not a morning person, for example, and you hate getting up at 5 a.m. to catch the morning light, then don't do it, because you're going to take bad photographs at 5 a.m. or whatever. Take photographs later in the day, when you are awake, and enjoy that process. Don't make yourself miserable, unless you like doing that sort of thing. That's just my philosophy.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. I think that is really good. For me, it's, sometimes because I do photography for a living, like my own work, I hardly ever get around to editing it because I'm sick of sitting at the computer. It's not as joyful as it used to be when I first started learning Photoshop in 1998. but you know, it's not as joyful. And I think if I didn't have to do it so much, it would be. And so always, you know, everybody was like, I really want to sell my artwork. It's like, are you sure you want to sell it? Because it's a lot of work to become a professional artist. It's much more fun just to be a hobbyist. So there's no shame in being a hobbyist, that's for sure. All right, so where can our audience find you? What's your website?
Well, I'm at just pretty easy. It's just my name, www.charlottegibb.com. And I also have a blog that you can access from that website, and you can sign up for my newsletter there. I don't send one out more than maybe once a month is all you'll hear from me. And it's usually just things like where I might be doing a speaking engagement, or if I have you know, something new to tell you. And I write about photography a lot. I write about the process of how I work, and I'll make the announcement about when the book is out too. So if you're interested in that I would recommend you sign up for my newsletter, because that's where those are the people who are going to hear about it first.
And it's put pretty clear how to sign up for your newsletter as soon as they get to charlottegibb.com.
Yeah, there's a pop-up that'll come up. There's something over at the bottom. There's something that says newsletter sign up. If you go to my blog, there's a thing on the side. So
Okay, good.
any one of those channels works, you know, anyone. And if
Great.
all else fails, just email me, charlotte@charlottegibb.com. I'm the only one who checks my email, so it's just me.
Okay, great.
And I do a column called Ask Charlotte, and you know, and I get some really interesting questions. I always respond to all of them. You know, when people write to me, I always respond. But I always get some very interesting questions, and I try to really help people, you know, one-on-one that way if they have any questions about photography.
And that's on your website?
It's on my newsletter. You know, at the bottom of my newsletter, I have an Ask Charlotte thing, so they can click on that, and it goes to my email, and I get it. So.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you for being on the Understand Photography show.
Thank you for having me, Peggy. That was really fun. All the way from the other side of the country, coast to coast.
Coast to coast and from north to south.
That's right. That's right. I think we're about as far away from each other as we possibly could be and still be in the United States.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Charlotte.
All right, Gal. Well, take care, and thanks for having me again. It was really fun.
Thank you for joining us on the Understand Photography show. I'm Peggy Fair, and we will see you next week.